Welcome to Anecdotes for Success with Matt and Paul. Storytelling is an art form, emphasizing the value and learning that is created through personal experience. Our purpose is to share these stories and experiences with the listener. Everyone has a powerful testimony. Let's use them to level up to our best life with truth, meaning, trade-offs, and perspective.
Big shout out to Isaac Mather for the new podcast intro. You can check Isaac's music out on all socials or directly at isaacmathermusic.com. All right, today we have Scott Clancy on the podcast. I tried going through formalities. We'll talk about that. That's a no-go. I already like Scott a lot, and we started doing what we always do. We're having great conversation, but luckily I stopped before Scott got going. So Scott, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. You know about the four pillars: truth, meaning, trade-off, perspective. We don't always identify them. They just sort of come out. We talked briefly that there's probably some comparisons. Well, not probably. There are a lot of comparisons in the book you wrote. You have the four. Go back as far as you want, and then let's just start talking about your book and whatever way the wind blows us the next 40 minutes or so.
Oh, hey, thanks, guys. I really enjoy your podcast. I think that the pillars that you've identified, man, it's like having a paradigm to look at just about anything, life. Like I'm a leader and a coach, yeah, but we could look at academics. You know, you guys look a lot at success or business, relationships. So I really love the pillars. And I mean, your first pillar is truth, and this one kind of resonates with me a lot. Both truth and meaning. A lot of what I did in the military and then my transition out, and the reason why I wrote the book Developing Coaching Leaders was about my journey in leading. You know, and I can admit quite honestly, maybe at the beginning of my military career, I wasn't the best leader in the whole wide world. Pretty brash guy, pretty loud, maybe pretty tactless. And I think there's a colloquial thing that people get around military leaders that they're like that. I don't think so at all. I think I was the oddball as compared to a lot of my compatriots. But the truth thing for me was coming to that realization and then working on it, saying, "Hey, listen, I've failed a bunch of things here, and I've done this wrong." And then the book is as much about, okay, here I messed this up. Here's a good example. Now put that in your head, and then don't do this kind of thing. And I think that resonates with people a little bit more than, hey, look at me, I'm really great. Look at all the great things that I've done. So my truth really goes back to wanting to be of service. Okay. Ever since I was a kid, and I'm Canadian, so it's the British kind of historical background from our military stuff. But, the changing of the guard on the front lawn of Parliament Hill. And I was from Ottawa, grew up in our nation's capital. So I used to see this all the time. And so then I was doing the changing of the guard on my front lawn when I was 5. So I always wanted to be of service. But funny enough, my hero, my military hero, was an American guy by the name of Gregory Boyington, Pappy Boyington, who was the commanding officer of the Black Sheep. And if you remember the old TV show, the Black Sheep. So I got the book when I was really young and read all about Pappy Boyington, Marine Corps pilot, most decorated Marine Corps ace in World War II. But he had a famous quote, and it was, "Just show me a hero and I'll prove he's a bum." And the idea of humility around this was a truth that I liked in terms of service. And so a lot of my life was about, giving back. And then, as I moved through my career, the next truth that came up was, hey, you're a parent and a husband. And the dichotomy between the completeness of those two roles. You're going to be parent and husband, so family man, and you're going to be a senior officer in the Canadian military, being given these awesome responsibilities and burdens of sometimes people's lives. Okay, how do you balance? How do you be both of those? And the truth was coming to, I think, for the rest of my life, trying to achieve that balance of having to be between those two things. And I don't think I was reflective enough to understand the and I'm going to use two words that I'm sure you'll come back to: either the perspective required by those two things, or the trade-offs that those were going to create. I'll leave it at that. That's kind of where I start when I think about your pillars. That's why I say I think it's just so awesome that you use those as a fantastic framework for these conversations.
Very interesting. Very interesting. It is. When you said that in looking what I looked at anyway in regards to your book and your career, and to hear someone who personally, your background that I admire very much, and what it must have taken to achieve what level of success you've achieved, and then to in reflection, and you said something I find, Scott, very well, it hits home with me because I'm people think that now I'm very reflective, and oh, you say these. I was not like that most of my life, and you just kind of touched on that. I guess it took maturity, and it took experiences, and it took perspective for me to recognize some of these things throughout, I guess, my surroundings and within my life, and things that I did not look at when I was in my 20s, and probably even in my 30s. Now that I'm in my late 40s, I look at the world a little bit differently. And I get the sense maybe some of that happened with you as well. Maybe not the same timelines, but certainly at certain points in your life. But one of the things that you said at the beginning that sounded like you knew when you were very young is you wanted to go into service. And what made you feel like military? I think of a military career when I was younger. To me, it wouldn't have been, I want to do this because I'm trying to serve people. I would have thought of it in a way that I want to be in the action, right? I want to be out there fighting the bad guys, and doing things for the good guys. And although that is service, I don't think at a young age I would have looked at it as any more than adventure, let's say. Why at such a young age do you think you realize that was service? Because I feel like that's a pretty good perspective for a younger person, and maybe a lot of the military folks you've been around all your or most of your life see it that way, but that surprised me. Why do should I be surprised?
Well, I think your reaction is spot on. Let me give you a couple of stories that might kind of shed some light on this, because I've asked myself the question this myself. I think I'm a little odd, and you can use that word for what it's worth, right?
Right.
Quirky is the new cool, right? So, or at least that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So when I was a kid, yeah, I liked the military. I liked the stories around the military. Yeah, there's the romantic piece to this, whether it's the TV shows, the movies, the things like this. However, military service was always sitting around me. I lived in our nation's capital. One of my father's best friends, a person who I knew through my dad as Mr. Taylor, was a Korean War veteran, and I knew about his service. Funny enough, he was one of the people that I put on my application as a reference when I wanted to join the service. And he was just a quietly serving individual, but I always had this reverence for military service. What that led me to is joining the Royal Canadian Air Cadets when I was 14. That exposed me to even more military personnel and military and a more martial lifestyle. Now, they're not, it's not a paramilitary. Well, I guess it was back in the day, kind of a paramilitary organization, but it was really about developing citizenship, and leadership and these kinds of things. And I saw and was exposed to great leaders, a lot of them who had, served in the military for a period of time. I became a glider and a powered aircraft pilot. As a matter of fact, I got my glider's license when I was 15, and I got my pilot's license before I had a driver's license. So,
Wow.
And so there was a lot of adventure already there. But
Yeah.
to me, the purpose of that, the higher purpose of that, was always to serve the nation. And I think that being in the Air Cadets from a young age, I connected that very, very fast. The story I'll tell you is that because I applied to go to military college, and a lot of my friends had much higher marks. Let's just say I wasn't an academic. When I was a kid, I liked to play football and basketball, and I was in the Air Cadets, and I liked to be out there with my friends and doing drill. I liked shooting rifles. I liked doing all the rest of that adventure stuff. But, sitting down and doing academics. Now, I worked hard-ish, but, I didn't so all my friends were getting these non-acceptance to one of our military academies here in Canada. And I'm going, okay, well, you got a 90 average and you didn't get in, and you got a 90 average and you didn't get in. So there's no way they're going to, and they accepted me with my 74 average and all the rest of those things. So when I went to the military college as a recruit, showed up, and on the second day, they had like our class of like 225. They have us all in this little room. They asked questions of, why did you join? And I thought that was an interesting question to ask young recruits, because I think it's very smart. Because if you connect people with why they do things from the very end, or at least ask them the questions that get them thinking, then what they're doing becomes more of a deliberate thing. And for me, they asked the question, and the first thing was, okay, show of hands, how many people just wanted an education? I swear to, 80% of the people in the room put up their hand. It's a free education. You serve 4 years afterwards, and you're gone, and you have job experience and a world-class education. Then the next question was, how many people wanted to, get a job and earn money? Okay, the rest, get out of your small town, play sports. These are all the rest of the questions. And then how many people wanted to serve their country? I felt like I was the only person with my hand up. So it's odd. So I think your reaction is right. But for me, I'd always been connected that way to the greater things with surrounding military service and support of the nation.
Well, I guess maybe my assumption was relatively accurate, and that was a little bit unique. So, with that said, was the goal always to be to attain your as far as you could go within the military? At the same time, it was I'm gonna see how far I could go, and was that just part of service or or was there some ego involved here?
Well, that's a great question. And I think, in all honesty, anything that anyone does, and it's a very Eastern approach to things, right? If you sit back and think of the wholeness of existence, then if you're going to attempt to do something to advance your own lot in life, then there has to be some ego in it. And from a psychological point of view, I think that we kind of deny, we put down ego. There's a lot of stuff today, especially now, about saying, oh no, that's ego bad, everything else good. But the reality is that's where your ambition is. From a psychological point of view, this is what's going to drive and motivate people to be able to do things. But I don't think it's pure ego. And when I say that, it's that I always wanted to be the best that I could be for the teams and for the service. So you're serving your team, you're leading the team that you have. I was an officer, so I was going to be placed in leadership positions. And at the same time, I was going to lead the nation. I always tried to do the best job. I never thought of my advancement. I always thought about doing the job I'm doing right now to the best of my ability. And I had a lot of great mentors who said that exact same thing. Just do what we tell you to do to the best of your ability. Everything else is going to take care of itself. And funny enough, I led the pleasured life of that played out very well for me.
Right. Paul, go ahead.
Well, I was
have a tendency to take over.
No, I'm the note taker, being the teacher. Can you give us a little bit of a background of your military career? I mean, you can go into as much detail as you want, but I know you were a pilot, helicopter pilot, and then maybe fill us in just in the brief description. You spent time doing joint stuff in the U.S., right?
Yeah.
Can you explain all that? Take as much time as you want before we get into the coaching and leadership, but just so people can have more of a background.
Sure. I joined the military in 1984. It took 5 years to go through our military academy system. I have a degree in military and strategic studies. I was always one of those folks that said, okay, my degree, my job, everything's going to match. There's going to be an alignment here. So, I was studying back in the day how to defeat the Soviet defense policies of the United States, Canada, how it's formulated, NATO, all the rest of these things. Meanwhile, there's, a huge presence in Europe with respect to NATO because we're defending against the Soviet hordes. And then the instant I graduated in 89, the wall fell and, everything changed. Now things have kind of come full circle. And I was a serving general going, no, the Russians don't think like this. They think like that. And they go, well, how do you know that? And it's because, some of us were in before we were just fighting extremism and 30 years hiatus and that. So I left and I got my wings in Canada. Everything that flies is in the Air Force. So I'm an Army aviator. In your military, I'd be an Army officer. In the Canadian military, everything that flies is in the Air Force. So I learned on jets first, and then from jets transitioned to helicopters, got my wings on helicopters, and then served on 3 tactical helicopter squadrons over the course of the 37 years that I served. I spent a lot of time, however, with our Army. So Army aviation is the helicopters that directly support the Army in their maneuvers around the battlefield. So, I lived on Army bases. We'd be the lone helicopter squadron on an Army base. I taught at the Army Staff College in Fort Frontenac in Kingston, Ontario. I was a staff officer in various jobs around the military. I commanded at various levels and deployed and commanded forces. I commanded our air component, as a matter of fact, in Haiti after the earthquake in 2010. One of the cool trade-offs decisions that I had to make, asked me about that, had to do with my deployment in Haiti. And then as a colonel, I got given the responsibility to go down to Colorado Springs and work in the command center, which is for NORAD and US Northcom. NORAD is North American Aerospace Defense Command. It's the binational command between Canada and the United States that watches the skies and protects North America from all threats, especially in the air, in the aerospace domain. So I did that for 3 years. There's always a Canadian and American in all positions throughout the NORAD chain. Funny enough, for a significant period of time, there was no American in the position that I was in, or that I was affiliated with. So, I was doing the command work, and Hurricane Sandy and things like this all happened on my watch in Colorado Springs. And then a little bit later, I was the deputy commander when I became a general officer. I was the deputy commander for the Alaska NORAD region, spent 2 years up in Alaska. Love Alaska. What a great place. Never got to see too much outside of Anchorage because the job was to stay there, and I was not allowed to leave when my boss was out of town, and my boss was out of town a lot visiting around his troops in Alaska and all the rest of stuff. So I had to stay put and answer the phone when it rang. And then my last job was the director of operations for all of NORAD, defending the continent. And binational command's an interesting thing for, all y'all. And I use that because I've been trained on the use of y'all and all y'all. Binational command means that there's always Canadian and American counterparts throughout. So the story I always tell is the morning of 9/11. It was the Canadian that was in charge down in Colorado Springs because the American commander happened to be out of pocket at that time. I was in the Canadian NORAD region, which is headquartered in Winnipeg, Manitoba, up here in Canada, and the Canadian commander was out of pocket. So the Canadian NORAD region was being commanded by the American. And down in Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, the American commander was out of pocket, so it was the Canadian that was actually in charge during that day. And you see this everywhere. The binational command is Canadians and Americans commanding each other's forces to be able to affect that binational cooperation.
Yeah, I think that's something I want to say I don't know about, but we don't think about that either. That's why I thought that was interesting you explained that. I'd like to say I knew. We just don't talk about that really. So you've spent all this time as a leader. I think what you just talked about in the last 5 minutes showcases you're a great leader. But it's funny when you hear military, I don't think of the word coach. Is that a fair statement? I think leader, hierarchy. I don't think coach.
So I'm with you. And that's why I wrote a book.
Right.
Right. And so, and we talk about, when we think about leaders and military leaders, okay, I think there's a certain persona in there. But I would say that for the most part, I find military leaders to have as much breadth and depth as almost any other space. But what I don't necessarily think about when I think about leaders when I was in, and a lot of time before I got very reflective about this, was coaching. Now, at the same time, a lot of us are parents. We get into coaching, not because, like I played college basketball but I didn't carry on. I've shattered and broke my ankle a few times, so I didn't carry on playing after, I graduated, because I liked my job being a pilot, and I didn't want to put that into problem just because I wanted to play basketball. So a lot of us get into coaching because of our kids. So I started coaching both of my kids in basketball, and as they got into those, you have two high school kids playing high school ball and playing club ball. And then I started being asked to coach elite teams. And then I ultimately got asked by our military academy, the Royal Military College in Kingston, to be an assistant coach on the staff there. Now, I'm not necessarily a professional basketball coach, like the X's and O's. I know the sport, I know the technical pieces and all this stuff. However, they brought me on more as a mentor to, a lot of the officer cadets that are serving there, and as a leadership example to these young cadets. That's a positive thing. And it was in my reflection around, okay, well, hold on for a second. Leading and coaching, the more I see really good leaders, they're employing techniques that I employ when I'm coaching my teams in basketball. And the more that I think about some of the coaching that I'm doing, do what I tell you. This is what right looks like, and you show that example, and oh yeah, you're right. So you're basically leading that team, and then you're showing an example of what trust looks like. You're showing an example of what right behavior looks like. I don't know how many times I've done something, in a game where, it's out of my mouth before I yelled at the ref the wrong way. And then the next time the ref comes down, I might have taken a timeout. I stop and I go over and say, you know what, I was wrong. I'm sorry about that, sort of thing. And I do it so that my players will hear me, and because sportsmanship is something and mistakes are things that you own up to, and that establishes trust. So it was the confluence, the intersection between those two things of coaching and leading. And the more that I saw it, the more that what if our leaders had coaching skills? What's the difference? And then just pulling that string on coaching, and what's the difference between enabling people and their development versus merely guiding them and giving them the X's and O's of whether it's military or life or business to get the performance done. Those are two different things. Wow, what a better place that we would be in. What a better world we would be in.
And you seem to have the best of both worlds credibility wise, because I'm not going to say you're not a credible leader with your military background, even though I've never served under you. I think that's the title and the respect you've earned, and the level you've coached with basketball. I can't say you can't coach. So how many people have both those things on their resume to write such a perfect book? I think it's pretty exciting.
Well, I think that's very nice of you. Thank you very much. But I'm a pretty humble guy. So there's ego and there's humility. There's Matt's going to laugh at it. There's the ego and the humility all on the same game here. Okay, but I like to think I'm a pretty humble guy. You can't come across like that, right? When you're going to be decisive in a military. Oh, I'm going to be humble. I don't know. Should we shoot down that airplane or not? That's just not a bad. That's not a good thing to be. What I would say is that I always wanted to learn. And in whether it was, coaching and basketball and doing those things, but I always wanted to learn what it was to be better. Now, one of the other reasons that I read this book, because I'm going to challenge your notion that, okay, you've got the credentials, you served in the military. I like what you said, because the qualifications there, I've never served under you. Okay, because there's a lot of military leaders. They might be keeping on advancing and all that, but are they really good leaders? So this is my challenge to because I have a lot of people that, listen, follow, read my book that are military or ex-military leaders. And I kept on saying the same thing. I talked to a lot of people and say, okay, what are the keys to your leadership? And I used to get spouted memes, it's all about servant leadership, and I'm not trying to poo-poo all these ideas or concepts, but when I got into an in-depth conversation with them, they could not explain to me what were the foundational tools that they were using, what were their key techniques that they were using. So if leadership is a learned skill, and I think it is, it's not just a trait, you're not just born with it, it's a learned skill, then we have to be developing this. I think the military does a good job of putting people into the situations, into the crucibles, the responsibilities of leadership, gives them those responsibilities. But that's different than deliberately developing those leadership skills. Mentoring and coaching and adding those will enable a deliberate development of that those skills. Now I'm going to apply the same logic to coaching. What are our systems rewarding? So let's just take a club basketball team in your local town. Okay, it might have teams or multiple teams at various age groups and, guys and girls and whatever. Okay, so a parent coach takes this team and it starts to win. Okay, did anybody look at the techniques that coach is using? What is it that you're actually rewarding? Is he or she only playing the 5 best players and that's it? And so what is it that this club wants to actually foster? Because I think we all get the idea that the pinnacle of this sport isn't playing in the NBA. The pinnacle in this sport is good citizens with good values that understand teamwork, that can play together, because the crucibles of sport are the same crucibles of life and business and education. So, if that's the case, then what's the responsibility of these clubs to look at what they're rewarding? But what they reward is, that's a winning coach. Okay. That's not a deliberate development of what those coaching skills are. And what I watched was these coaches that would say, okay, Jimmy, you go here, you do this, then you pass the ball to John and he shoots. Why? Because I told you to. And not only is the IQ of those players, in the floor, like they only know what they know to execute, and they're picking this stuff up on the fly. But this is all nepotistic in its approach. And I like this player, that player goes to this position, this, you don't shoot, and all of these rules. You're not a shooter, don't shoot. Well, what are you talking about? You're not developing anyone. And so this is where that linkage between developing the individuals and coaching and leading, this is all connected together. And so that's kind of where I'd place that intersection between those two things. Just because I have a lot of post-nomals after my name and you could, have that large bio, that doesn't mean that a leader is a good leader. I would say, prove it. Prove that they're a good leader.
No, I like that. I mean, like I said, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt, but the more I talk to you, the more I'm believing as well. It's funny what you say about club basketball. My daughters, we grew up in the travel softball world, and they both played in college. And it's all that, like, if you're not believing in any type of process, or if there is no process, when it's all said and done, what have you built? I mean, a winning record, or if you build a future leader, right? A future contributor society. And I think we get that. I think that's blurry sometimes. And the example you talked about's exactly what happens too often. It's all about the coach winning. And not that that's not your number one priority, but how do you go about it, right?
So to me, now I had the benefit of being, by the time I started coaching my kids, I was a lieutenant, or what you would call a lieutenant colonel, in the Royal Canadian Air Force. So, I wasn't going to be bullied by parents. I wasn't going to be bullied by the system or other coaches. I knew what we were out here to do. And, when kids would ask me, why do you coach? I would say, because I want you to be involved in basketball and have that as part of your life for the rest of your life. What a wonderful sport. I love this sport. I love what it does. I love the camaraderie. I love the thing. I love some of the technical stuff. I love watching March Madness. Okay. I want this to be part of your life. And the only way that I can get that is make sure that you're great people and you have a great experience. And so at the end of this, you had these, my sons, they still keep in touch with a lot of the players that they played with in high school and things like this. And that's because they had these experiences on these teams that was, formative for their development, as opposed to being winning. And you can win, but I never cared about the score. I never cared. As a matter of fact, I hated close games. I hated close games because I knew that it might turn on a coaching decision of myself, and that crisis. I lived that crisis in my work life all the time. I didn't like the stress necessarily of that. I liked the pure development. I preferred practices to games, to be honest and clear, because that's where I felt that I could watch these players evolve in their thinking and their mindset, and then how they were as a team. And then a lot of times, even in games, I'd prefer that if we were just winning handily or we were losing, significantly, at which point in time I could focus on what I wanted to focus on, which was the development of the players. I just let the scoreboard take care of it. So
real funny story before I know Matt's head's ready to explode with a few questions. I'm probably crazier in practice than games, because when the game comes, that's why it's called a game. Like that's where the fun and the fruits of your labor should exist. But I used to have a thing on the drinking fountain, an empty cup, and when a player was getting all tense and angry, they'd go over there and metaphorically empty their cup, right? Well, it's a real close situation, and I was just complaining and yelling about the ref about something, and the player looked at me and said, "Coach, you got to go empty that cup right now." And it's my proudest moment that they thought in that tense situation that they could say that to me, and I wouldn't just blow up even more, even though they were completely right. So that's the type of person you want to try to coach and grow into a future leader, right? Somebody that's willing to call you out on what you talked about, apologizing to an official earlier, that will call you out in the most tense situation of the game and say, "Hey, that's not what we believe in. Come on, coach."
And
And I was so,
kudos to
I
you.
started laughing. It's like,
Yeah.
son of, you got me. You got me. And they went
Kudos to
over
you for creating that space where that player feels welcomed enough,
Yes.
honored enough, trusted enough, safe enough to be able to say in that grade and know that only good things are going to happen after you make that comment. And that you know, like, and I was pretty hard on the team in practices because I wanted them to always be their best, but in games I was extraordinarily positive. And I like to think of myself as a very positive leader. The only times when I would get myself a little upset is when we'd have refs that were allowing dangerous things to happen on the floor. And that's kind of where, you know, safety and these kinds of things. And I just kept myself level. And if I kept myself level, the team was always level. So that was always a good thing.
No, it's exciting stuff.
Scott, question for you. And Paul, all these things are going through my head.
I know.
And so I'm going to turn this to business a little bit, Scott. Okay, in terms of leadership and so if we're talking military and sports, I always feel like, and I certainly could be wrong. The coach, the leader, the person in charge has so much leverage, right? You do what I say, or else you're not going to play. I can only imagine what happens in the military if you're not doing what you're told to do, whether it's, you know, running, push-ups, whatever it might be. You know, we've got all the leverage. Even in the classroom, we have all the leverage, right? I'm in charge of your grades. I'm in charge. There is someone at the top who can, and you said this earlier, Scott, reward whatever you said. What are the systems where we are rewarding? And I couldn't agree more. That is paramount. Go into the business world, and our goal, I almost look at it, it's like it's game day every day. I don't get practice. I don't get that opportunity to let everyone screw up. Give them a pat on the back. Let's go over it again. And now there's training and some of those kinds of things, but you know, that's kind of at the beginning. And then we kind of have to release people to go. And then our reward systems are also punitive in business. This is, you know, and I'm speaking for myself, I'm speaking for other people. And this is something I battle all the time. I talk to my leadership and I go, everything's so punitive. And I'm not a punitive person. I don't think that's great leadership. But if you don't show up on time, what are the consequences? If I can't count on you to show up at all, if I can't count on you, period, if you're not performing in the areas that I need you to perform in, whether it's making the product the same way that we're trained to, or our service isn't the way it should be, or we're not cleaning the way we are, and A, B, C, and D, doesn't matter what they are, but our reward systems are all so punitive. Do you talk to business people at all? Do you have any, and you know, and I have these conversations with business people all the time. It can be very frustrating to try to come up with the proper reward systems that are, I shouldn't use the word proper, with the reward systems that are getting people to do what we want them to do and rewarding them for it in ways that aren't just financial. Because there's problems with that too. That I can get into, but I don't think I need to for the moment. Like, what do you think about what I just said? And I'm admittedly, Scott, I've battled with this for 25 years, and I'll probably battle with it for another 25 years. And I know I'm not alone in it. Like, how do you feel? Or what are your thoughts on that?
So that's interesting. Probably the area that I am the least comfortable is in the translation of some of the skills that I think I have in leading and coaching to the business world. But here's what I do know. I think there's extraordinary similarities between what we're seeing in our militaries, Occidental militaries worldwide. Low recruitment is endemic now in all of the Western militaries. United States and Canada are facing significant crisis with recruits and qualified personnel showing up at the doors. The quality of those recruits is falling. We're not attracting the same talent. Military service, it doesn't have the same stigma that it used to. And I will say that there's a significant difference between the United States and all the rest of your Western allies. The value of military service in American culture is fundamentally different than it is in many other cultures, and is not seen necessarily as, as the profession of choice necessarily, especially for advancement and within societal norms. But what we're seeing is low employee loyalty, employees they would rather avoid conflict and move on to the next job with all of the problems and the machinations that takes than to confront and, be part of an organization where they're going to have to, have some, I say conflict, not in terms of the, physical violence or these kinds of things, but just dealing with the day-to-day things of having to be led. I find that leaders are using, and business leaders, military leaders, using positional authority as opposed to influence. And your influence is going to be based on trust and relationships and things like this. And fragments here. The reason why I think coaching is so important to leading is that when an individual is disenfranchised with its leaders, you hear the same rhetoric. They don't understand. When I was promoted to general, they said, "You are now part of they," right? So I was never allowed to say it. But when you hear employees or teams saying this, they say they don't understand. They're disconnected. They are thinking only about themselves. Back to your question, Paul, with respect to ego and advancement there, right? Would you compromise your own advancement for the betterment of the team? And that's a fair question, whether you're a military leader, whether you're a business leader. But it's the disconnected piece that, to me, is the center point to this. And that, how do you feel connected to what you're doing? It's a job. Ask the leader, how do you feel about your employees? They get a paycheck, they should be happy about that. There's a disconnection here where you're doing what is, binary transactions based upon performance. Even the lexicon that we use, reward system, really? So, I got to live and breathe in a system where I could always say, yes, but you're here to serve the nation and the greater good to that and I could always trump everybody's conversation with respect to why you didn't, with that, well, we're here to defend the nation, but that's kind of brutish. And if you're bringing that up at every single time, why do I have to stay another weekend away from my family, do this training? Because I told you to, and because we're preparing. Okay, well, that's not going to resonate, and I'm going to vote with my feet because I don't want to be here. And it's an all volunteer. So we're facing exactly the same things. So coaching. I think that leadership and coaching are emotional trust relationships. Okay, they're at an emotional level. So if you're leading someone, if you're coaching someone, you have to establish an emotional connection to them. And it's going to resonate at an emotion. It's not transactional. It's at an emotional level. Now, you might be emotionally tied to the fact that I'm paying your bills for you. Okay, but there is an emotional level here. It's a trust relationship. So you're going to have that trust, and trust is a dynamic thing, and it's two ways, and how it's given and how it's sustained are interesting dynamics. And it's a relationship the same way. It's a personal relationship. It's a one-on-one relationship. You're going to have, as a leader, a relationship with the team, and you're going to have a relationship with those individuals by adding coaching skills. So leading, I know what leaders do, what I think I know what business leaders do. I know what military leaders do. I know what government leaders do. They issue guidance. They manage portfolios. They do all the rest of those management things. They provide guidance and direction. They break those things down, and then they issue guidance to those teams. And then they follow up on those things to make sure that's done. And then they try to inspire people within, the meaning of what that is. For business, the bottom line is profit. Let's just keep it like that, simple for right now. Okay. But coaching Coaching is about an individual's development to maximize their potential so that they can get to the next level. So imagine, I love that you have Subways in upstate New York. I want to go visit all of them and eat there. For the employees that are at Subway, the interesting part between their supervisors and the people that are doing the front end work is, okay, where do you want to be next? How can I enable you to get to the next? Well, I'm going to school. So maintaining a constant, income through school, that's important to you. And then being able to, okay, so getting to know people, connecting with them, establishing that trust. Hey, they care about me. They care about my advancement. These are the things that are going to create, and counter that low employee loyalty that we see, whether it's military leaders, and what it's going to react to from a leader point of view is you're no longer relying on that. Well, I'm the colonel and I said so,
Right.
Or I'm in charge. I pick the paychecks, do what I tell you to do, or else, because then you're back to that binary transaction. One of the phrases I like to use is elevate the relationship above those binary transactional things that you're having. If you're a coach on the basketball court, it's not really about X's and O's. When a player's not doing well or not, it's never about that, is it? It's always about something deeper. It's always about, and if you don't get to know the individual, you're never going to be able to get to those core things. And you're always going to be saying, you're not pivoting right. You're never pivoting right. You don't pivot right. I'm taking you off the floor because you don't pivot right. Well, Johnny's sitting on the bench because his family's going through a divorce and he can't concentrate enough and all the rest of the stuff. Whatever it is, you didn't take the time to understand all that stuff as a coach and to be able to just coach him through those things. So it doesn't matter how much you coach the X's and O's, it doesn't how much you change that reward system. You're always going to be playing on that flat plane level by adding that coaching dynamic. And that coaching dynamic is about developing the people on your teams. And it has to be done at all levels. You can't just be, hey, I'm a great CEO, I'm going to do these things, because if that first level, that first level supervisor is not paying attention to the individuals and developing them. And some people are not going to be into that. That's fine. That doesn't mean that you're not going to try and keep on connecting with them. So that's kind of my answer. I hope that gives you where I'm at, Matt.
Scott, I love it. It's a great answer, and it resonates very much so with not only my businesses, whatever they may be, and all meaning all of them, and just working with people together in business. I mean, there is that. Everything's relationships. Paul, how often do I use that word? I mean, I must use it 100 times a day. Everything's relationships. And, for a business, in my instance, the bigger I get, the more distance I get from certain levels, right? And believe me, it's not because I want to, it's because it's just necessary to do it. There's no way to talk to hundreds of employees daily and be that coach every day like I was when I had my first one. And it was always about building relationships, and it was always about what, like you said, what do you want? Why are you really here? I know you're here for a job, but there's more to it than that. And, and I get with leaders in my organization and leaders in other business organizations, the simple answer so often is, this person's not working out. Let's move on from them, right? And then, because the magic person is just one person away. And as I do, Scott, that's not the answer. There's something going on with that person who's not working out. We've identified they're capable. We identified they can meet our standards, as we bring them onto the organization. There's something else going on there that we haven't tapped into, that we're not helping solve their problem, right? Or whatever their issue is. It's not that they're not capable of pivoting correctly, like you said, on the floor. They're probably very capable. There's something else going on in their world, and we are constantly talking about, and it gets difficult because we don't have practice. We have game day every day, trying to think in those terms, or getting our teams to think in those terms. And I'll put it all on me, starting from the people, the leadership at the top. It is my job to bring that down to the levels and have it continue down. It's my responsibility. And oftentimes I don't do a good enough job on it. And many times I don't. And then that, you can see it feed down to the front lines, like you said, where I always say, this is where it happens, right here. This is the front line. This is where it's happening. We can have whatever titles we want here and there, and all fancy, people can have fancy offices and all those great things. It all happens here at that front line. And if that's not working right, because we're not helping to develop them or understand those folks, and we've all been frontline folks. Cleaning toilets my first job, and pushing carts my second job, and we've all been those frontline people. If you don't feel understood, there's always a different opportunity. So I think your answer was the things I just said. I said because of what you were just giving me. I didn't. It wasn't a loaded question. I really wanted to hear your answer, and it's just got my wheels turning. And I need to talk. I need to think more and get my team thinking more on individual development than I think we do.
So I'm with you. What I say to my leaders, that come to me, that I mentor, and I still mentor a lot of leaders that are still in the military, and people come to me for, so we walk through these things together, because self-awareness is an interesting thing, right? And you guys have talked significantly in your podcast about what that means. And in my mind, the work that we do as leaders and coaches on ourselves translates immediately to our teams, immediately. But I'm going to also pull this back to your pillar of perspectives. You have to be able to give your team the perspectives that they need so that they can develop. So to me, if you're not spending 20% of your time teaching, and when I say teaching, it's like the perfect word between coaching and mentoring, right? It's teaching. And I know that if there's any of my old military people that are listening to this, they're going to go, yeah, Scott was always droning on about one thing or another. But when I talked to the people on my teams, they said, yeah, sir, might not like this, might not like this. But man, we always knew where we were going, and how we could improve. And then, because you're preparing them, you're always preparing. Now, this is the tough part, right? As business leaders, as senior executives, you have to take the time there. And there's a trade-off there. Right? If you don't give the team the perspective they need to develop and learn, to get better, to understand where they are and where they need to be, if you can't pull them in and connect them to that at an emotional level, then the trade-off is going to be a continued performance piece where you're just looking for that self-motivating individual, and it's going to be a rotating door of employees and all the rest of the stuff. The other trade-off is, if you take the time to do this is back to that analogy with respect to the scoreboard. I never really cared about the scoreboard. That's not where my focus is. My focus is on the development and the pieces that need to be working for the team. Scoreboard will take care of itself. So that 20% there, this is where you're preparing people to replace you. To me, sometimes that's about holding people accountable. If leading and coaching is an emotional trust relationship, there can be no trust without accountability. And that accountability sometimes is, if you've got a supervisor that's saying, oh, you're doing great work, you're doing great work, you're doing great work, we have to let you go. What? Well, you never cleaned well, you didn't do this. How many times have we been in this? And I used to, when I was promoted to 1-star brigadier general, I was given a portfolio for all of the personnel in the Royal Canadian Air Force. And a lot of times I'd get all the problem childs, people that were advancing and things went haywire or things like this. And I was told to mentor them along. And I'd been mentoring senior officers in the service for quite some time by this time. And a lot of times I found that they were never given that frank lay down of, it was always kudos and being lauded. Well, you're fantastic. And I also worked in the pilot sphere a lot, right? So, and if you tell how many pilots does it take to change a light bulb? One, because he holds it and the world revolves around him, right? It's like, so they're always told you're fantastic, you're great, until you're not. And then there's a schism that happens. And, I came up in a community that we're a little bit more rough and tumble with our folks. And you might get a glowing report, but behind that report was a whole bunch of things that you need to work on. And that dichotomy was very beneficial for my personal development. And then I'd get these senior officers, sometimes at the rank of full colonel, that had never been told, you didn't do this. You don't care about that. You're not worried about trying to get a hold of these. And some of these are qualifications you need. And you think that you're going to care. Well, nobody told me. Okay, so that accountability comes through. You have to give people those perspectives. So that phrase you guys like to use, as compared to what? Well, let's walk through this. And I think in today's world, and I see this in the business world, and I see this in the military world, we're afraid to do comparisons. Oh no, I'm not going to compare you to Johnny. I'm not going to compare you to Miss White. I'm not going to compare you to everything else. This is all about you. No, we're going to compare. There's one position available. That position needs these qualifications. You don't have that. Tell me why you think. Now, from a development point of view, let's make a plan for you to get that. So next time this comes up, we can get, oh, okay. Well, that frankness, that openness, we're not having these uncomfortable conversations because leaders want to shy away from them. And to me, and this is a sports analogy, get uncomfortable with being uncomfortable, right? If I was going to talk about rebounding, okay, I want your shoulders to be square to the you're going to come down, you can put a ball on your outside shoulder, you're going to go up with two hands, you're going to finish with one. I don't want to do that. Oh, this looks, yeah, but someone's going to come over, you're going to pin the ball, they're going to, like, all these things. Oh, it doesn't feel comfortable. Well, do it 10,000 times until you've developed new muscle memory where that uncomfortable feels comfortable. And this is the same way about these conversations. Frank, tactful, transparent, positive conversations that might be uncomfortable will have fantastic rewards, and they contribute directly to accountability.
What wonderful. I again, you touched on so many things there that I find hit home, and because I'll tell you, and when I talk to anyone who claims to be a leader, right? And I mean that with nothing but respect, of course. One of the things that I often default to is leader in what? And because I've felt, that there are some different areas and different qualities that maybe in the business world are a little bit more challenging than what I've experienced in a classroom. I'll just use those two. But really, at the end of the day, I think you nailed it on that. Just talking about the frank conversation, the difficult conversation, because in the business world, particularly now, we can be so afraid of having that conversation because what if they leave us? Because it's so hard to find people, and it's so hard. It's so hard. So let's just tell them great things, and I'm not sure we're helping ourselves out in that situation. And so I appreciate you touching on that.
Leaders. I think that good leaders develop good leaders, but in doing so, you're going to have to allow them, give them the opportunities to fail. And then when they do mess up, they can't have catastrophic consequences for those things. This is your reward system that you're touching on here, is that if the answer is every time I do something wrong, then I'm never going to admit to you that there's something wrong. Now, the analogy I'll use with this is I want you to think of flight safety organizations. So in the air forces around the world, we all have, and all airlines all have these extraordinarily precise flight safety systems, but they're based upon a very positive reporting culture. And that reporting culture is you see something wrong, you say something. Okay, but I think it's more than that. I want you to think about, okay, you're walking along a path in the woods, kind of a simple path. All of us are pretty much the same age. You guys are younger than me for sure. Poof, you fall flat on your face. Now, your first reaction is look around, say, anybody see me fall? Okay,
That's
right?
true.
Okay. But the real reaction should be to draw attention to yourself. Hey, did anybody see me fall? Because if you're in that workplace, you don't know what the next thing is going to be. And from a flight safety point of view, that might be a catastrophic problem. Mm-hmm. And that might be indicative of 101 things that are going on behind the scenes, culturally or whatever else, that are being glossed over because people don't want to say, or like all of the real cause factors behind these catastrophic problems we see, whether it's in business or in flying or in our institutions. They're never one. But a good culture is someone where they're not afraid to draw attention to themselves. Because by doing so, hey, you see Scott fall on his face? Okay, then snicker, joke, laugh, clean himself off, right? All the rest of those good things inside the culture. And then, hey, we got to fix this. What's that? What with that? What sort of thing like this? And if it was my fault that I fell, Scotty, you got to pay more attention to this. You got, yeah, you're right. I really do. And that's good. Okay. I'm really glad. Okay. You're going to get something in your locker every day for a month about this because it's funny as hell. Oh, that's cool. But I'm going to learn from this. And there has to be a culture here where you're giving people opportunities and that the errors that they make can't be catastrophic. They're seen as a way in which to develop. If you have enough time to lean, then you have enough time to clean. The old adage when I was working in restaurant stuff, sort of thing like this, is if you can, as a leader, can make that come alive for that team and tell them why that's meaningful and then that's valued. And then when someone screws up on that, you develop a system where they go, oh yeah, I did that wrong. I had that opportunity. Okay, well then good. You learn from it. Yeah. And then they move on and they go, yeah, I'm better for it. Okay, and then you're rewarding that by advancement, by whatever it is. These are the things that are going to create positive culture, and those cultures, those teams with good cultures, they just outperform.
They win.
Teams
Yeah,
that don't.
they win. Yeah.
Hey, let's spend the last couple minutes plugging your book now, and I'm gonna tell you how I went about it, and then you tell me if it's right or wrong. I've coached and taught, and I have a unique way of how I get to run my classroom. You may have heard from other episodes, but when I got reading through this, I found myself, I started skipping to the sections that I thought were resonating to me from what I was coaching. Like, I love the fundamentals versus the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures. But all of a sudden, I skipped to chapter 13 because balance pops into my head. Like I've been struggling with that. And then I love in the prove it section where if I improve myself, I improve the team. And so I don't know if that's how it was intended. I don't know if that's because I have coaching experience. I'm not saying I'm an expert by any means, but I'm looking at this as a guidebook that I can always pop back into things I'm struggling with and take pieces from that. So is that right or wrong? Should I have read it cover to cover? You tell me.
Now, my wife, Val, when we were writing this piece, she said, wouldn't it be neat if you had a book where someone could have it, yes, in the bathroom, and they could just pick it up, flip to a page, read something for 4 or 5 minutes. It's 2, 3, 4 pages long. And to me, I was going, oh, okay, it didn't start that way. Some of the chapters are a little bit longer than others, but it definitely is one. And the more people that have come back to me, there are people that'll read it from tip to toe. That's just how they are. But I like the idea of flipping around. There's something here for everyone a little bit. I think that, so I was a senior executive leader, with hundreds of people on my personal staff, leading an senior officer in the Royal Canadian Air Force. There's 14,000 people in the RCAF. So, when you're leading those kind of complex teams, prioritization systems, setting intentions, how you work complex scheduling systems, there's some management stuff in some of the TTP sections in the book for that. But for a young leader that's just got their first supervisory thing, I'm really sure they kind of need that stuff. So you pick what's applied to you. And a lot of the beta readers that read it on the front end, I took a young officer cadet from the Royal Military College, as a matter of fact, who loved all the sports analogy because, was a college level sports athlete, at the same time as having to just start out and leading, and they love that stuff. But some of the complex stuff for later on, they could leave aside. So I think there is, and the thing that I'm getting more feedback on is that senior and executive leaders that those complex systems, that's not what they're going back and reading. They're going back to the fundamentals. They're going, yes, this is, I need to go revisit this kind of piece here. And so, that's the kind of stuff I like. I try to keep it pragmatic, where there's examples, there's tips, there's a few lists in here, things you can try. And then the last thing, remember we were saying leaders when they're starting out, like what, they're not aware. And it seems like all of us arrive at this journey in life later on where we're a little bit more self-aware. And I do think that self-awareness is key to being a good leader and coach and how it translates. It's the advice that I give to all young, first-time leaders. Get a journal, get a practice, get in there. And this isn't about, hey, I felt sad today, although that's good stuff. Okay, this is about how did you do leading? How did that make you feel? How do you think that other person made you feel? And just being reflective on those things, man. If you just wrote down trust, connection, relationships, and listening, and then said, okay, fine, those are the only things that I'm going to think about for the next year in my journaling on leadership, you would be a monumentally better leader than I ever was at the beginning of my career.
It's such good stuff. Where can we find your book?
So, it's available on Amazon. If you just want to go to www.scottclancy.ca/book, that'll take you to, whether it's Barnes and Nobles or Amazon or all the rest of the places, you can click on that.
We'll have that in the bio for sure. I know you've got another question, Matt, or thought.
I got one more. I gotta ask you, Scott. It's totally unrelated, but I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't. It may be top secret, but you've spent a lot of time, I assume, flying in the air. You've worked with a countless number of pilots, NORAD, UFOs, aliens. What do we got here? Yes, no, can't tell us.
So you guys are funny. But
I was thinking that the whole time.
It's cool. You guys remember the Chinese balloon that happened just 6 months ago? So because I had been out for about a year and a bit by that time, I got called from I was on Anderson Cooper doing,
really?
CNN sort of thing like this, answering questions about this. And it didn't come up except for one interview with, I don't want to say what news outlet it was, but that it's just an odd thing to think about those things. My answer to that when I was in uniform was always the same thing. And I think I have the same perspective now. There are so many real threats out there that compromise national security. The Russians, and I was up in Alaska for 2 years. They're a few miles off of the coastline of our continent all the time, like often. And they're doing it with a very singular purpose, which is to test our defenses so that they can attack them. And the day is coming when they are going to want to do that. So, I'm not concerned about UFOs or UAPs or whatever we're calling them these days, because I don't really see the threat from them, because there are so many other real threats that we're dealing with on a daily basis. So, but Santa, we track Santa every year. And
yes, I know. That came in very handy when the kids were young.
I answered the phone for a couple of years, and it was the most rewarding time I've spent on a telephone forever, listening to people from all over the world. My wife and I both, crazy stories of children calling, and just the magic that surrounds that time. So
Wow, neat.
Scott, this was great. We thank you for your time, and we'll check in with you. This is a long-term thing for us. So you were an incredible conversation today. So hopefully next time we come knocking, you don't say Paul and Matt who.
Oh, guys, like I said at the beginning, I want to come back as many times as you want. I want to talk about trade-offs. We never got a chance to get there.
I know.
The different things. I love the way in which you've structured this framework. I think it's something that really can provide people with a way of thinking about anything in their lives. And I think it's just fantastic. And so thank you for everything you guys do.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks again. And we will be in touch. I'm not just saying that.
See ya.
Thanks, Scott.